My sister smirked before she spoke. It wasn't subtle. It was the kind of smile she used when she knew she had the upper hand and wanted everyone else in the room to feel it. We were standing in the middle of a private event space at a resort, just outside Colorado Springs. Soft music catered food people in tailored jackets and dresses. Her coworkers were everywhere. So was her boss. She slipped her arm through mine like she was doing me a favor and pulled me forward. "This is my sister," she said loud enough for the people closest to us to hear. Then she tilted her head and added, "She's kind of the failure of our family." She laughed lightly like it was a joke everyone should understand. A few people smiled awkwardly. One man coughed and looked at his drink. My parents were standing a few steps behind us. My mother pressed her lips together and glanced down at the floor. My father let out a short, uncomfortable chuckle, the one he always used when he didn't want to get involved. No one corrected her. I didn't say anything. I didn't correct her either. I stood there, shoulders straight, hands relaxed at my sides, doing what years in uniform had trained me to do. Stay still. Stay neutral. Don't give anyone the reaction they're trying to provoke. My sister turned to her boss, clearly expecting him to laugh along with her. He didn't. He was a tall man in his late 50s. Gray hair cut short, posture rigid, in a way you don't learn in corporate training seminars. He looked at my sister first. Then he looked at my parents. Then he looked at me. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Conversations nearby started to trail off as people sensed something was off. My sister shifted her weight, still smiling, but now it looked forced. My mother cleared her throat softly. Finally, her boss spoke. "Interesting," he said calmly, almost casually. That was it. One word. No laugh, no comment. He nodded once and turned back to another conversation, as if nothing unusual had just happened. The moment passed, but the tension didn't. My sister rolled her eyes and muttered something about him being socially awkward. My parents avoided looking at me altogether. Within a few minutes, I made an excuse about needing some air and stepped outside. The night was cool and quiet. I stood near the edge of the parking lot, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the muffled sound of laughter from inside. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in a familiar way. Being labeled the family failure wasn't new. It had been happening for as long as I could remember. The only difference was the audience. I drove back to my place alone. A small rental not far from base. Nothing fancy, nothing worth showing off. I took off my jacket, set my keys on the counter, and sat down at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. I didn't replay the scene in my head the way people imagine you do after moments like that. I didn't need to. I already knew how it fit into the larger pattern. My sister had always been the story my parents liked to tell. She was the one with the clean resume, the polished career path. The job that made sense at dinner parties. She worked in corporate logistics for a company that dealt with large government contracts. She wore the right clothes, said the right things, and knew how to make herself look indispensable. I took a different route. I joined the Army when I was young enough that my parents still thought they could talk me out of it. They tried. They told me I was throwing away my future, that I was too smart for something so unstable, that I'd regret it. I didn't regret it. Not then, not now. What I didn't do was to talk about it. I didn't come home and list deployments or explain what my job actually involved. I didn't correct them when they said things like, "So you're still doing that military thing?" I let them believe whatever version of me made them comfortable. That night, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I thought about how easy it had been for my sister to say those words. The failure of our family. Like it was a settled fact. Like everyone there would naturally agree. I poured a glass of water and stood by the sink, staring out the dark window. I wasn't hurt in the dramatic way people expect. I wasn't on the verge of tears. Mostly I felt a kind of clarity that only shows up after something obvious finally happens out loud. I had spent years showing up when my family needed something, watching their houses when they traveled, sending money without making a big deal out of it, taking calls late at night when something went wrong and they needed advice or help navigating paperwork they didn't understand. I did it quietly, I did it without keeping score, and none of that had changed how they saw me. What stuck with me the most wasn't what my sister said. It was how easily everyone else accepted it. The silence. The way no one thought it was worth correcting. I rinsed out my glass and set it in the sink. Tomorrow was a regular workday. Meetings, reports, coordination calls. The kind of routine that leaves no room for overthinking family drama. I went to bed without setting an alarm. I didn't need one. Years of early mornings had taken care of that. When I closed my eyes, the image that stayed with me wasn't my sister's smirk or my parents' expressions. It was her boss's face, the way he'd looked at me. Not curious, not confused, just attentive, like he was filing something away. At the time, I didn't attach meaning to it. I didn't assume it meant anything at all. It was just another moment in a long line of moments where I learned again exactly where I stood with my family. I woke up before my alarm and lay there for a few seconds staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the heater cycling on and off. That calm, controlled silence was familiar. It was easier than noise, easier than people talking around you without actually hearing you. I got dressed, poured coffee into a travel mug, and drove toward base as the sky slowly lightened. Traffic was thin. Most mornings were like this. Predictable, orderly, nothing like family gatherings. As I drove, my mind drifted backward, not because I wanted it to, but because certain patterns don't need invitations to resurface. They've been there so long they move on their own. In my family, roles were assigned early. My sister was the one everyone talked about. She was outgoing, confident, and quick to explain herself. Teachers loved her. Relatives remembered her birthdays. When she spoke, people listened. When she succeeded, it was proof of her potential. When she failed, it was temporary. A phase. Something she would obviously overcome. I was the other one. I wasn't loud. I wasn't difficult. I didn't cause trouble. I did my homework. I cleaned up without being asked. I stayed out of the way. Somehow that made me invisible. Or worse, it made me suspicious. Adults don't always trust quiet kids. They assume something must be wrong. At family events, people asked my sister about her plans. What college she wanted. What she was thinking of majoring in. What kind of career she imagined for herself. When they turned to me, it was usually an afterthought. So, what about you? They'd ask, already half turned away. If I answered confidently, it was brushed off as unrealistic. If I hesitated, it was taken as confirmation that I didn't have much going for me. Either way, the conclusion was the same. My parents didn't set out to be cruel. They just made choices over and over that added up. When resources were limited, they went where the return seemed highest. Tutoring, test prep, summer programs. My sister's schedule was full of opportunity. Mine was full of reminders to be practical. You're more independent, my mother used to say, like it was a compliment. You don't need as much help. By high school, the gap was obvious. My sister's achievements were displayed on the refrigerator. Certificates, photos, letters. Mine were acknowledged verbally, if at all. A quick nod. A distracted, "That's nice." Then the conversation shifted back to her. I learned early not to argue. Arguing made things worse. It labeled you as difficult, ungrateful, emotional. I learned to keep my reactions internal and my voice level. That habit would follow me into adulthood long before I understood why it mattered. The night I told my parents I wanted to join the army was the first time I remember the disappointment being said out loud. They sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, listening like they were hearing about a bad diagnosis. My sister leaned against the counter, arms crossed already, shaking her head. "That doesn't make sense," my father said. "You're smart. Why would you do that?" My mother asked if I was running away from something. My sister asked if I realized how unstable that life was. Moving all the time. No clear future. No guarantees. They spoke as if the decision were happening to them, not me. I explained my reasons simply. I wanted structure. I wanted responsibility. I wanted to be part of something where results mattered more than presentation. I didn't say it out loud, but I also wanted a place where the rules were written down, not implied and constantly shifting. They didn't hear any of that. What they heard was risk, uncertainty, a path they couldn't brag about. That was the moment my sister became the success story by default. She stayed on the approved track. I stepped off it. After I left for training, the calls slowed. Not immediately. At first there were updates and check-ins. Then weeks passed. Then months. My sister's life filled the space I left behind. Promotions, new apartments, new connections. My absence became normal. When I came home on leave, I noticed how conversations adjusted around me. People avoided details. They didn't ask questions they didn't understand. If someone mentioned my service, it was brief and vague. "She's still in the army," my mother would say, as if clarifying a phase that hadn't ended yet. I learned to stop correcting them. Over the years, I sent money when it was needed. Not dramatically, not with announcements, just transfers. Covering a bill here, helping with a down payment there. My sister never acknowledged it. My parents never mentioned it. That was fine. I didn't need recognition for it. At least I told myself I didn't. What I didn't realize was how thoroughly the label had settled in. The family failure wasn't just something my sister said for effect at a party. It was the shorthand they'd all been using internally for years. The explanation for why I didn't quite fit into their version of success. By the time I pulled into the parking lot at work, the sun was fully up. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the building, blending into the steady flow of people moving with purpose. Inside these walls, my role was clear. Expectations were defined. Performance mattered. No one cared how charismatic I was at a dinner table. As I passed through security and headed toward my office, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. A new email notification. I didn't check it right away. There was no rush. Whatever it was, could wait until I was seated, until I was back in a space where things made sense. I set my bag down, powered up my computer, and finally glanced at the screen. The subject line was short, professional, neutral. It was from someone I didn't expect to hear from at all. I stared at the email subject line for a second longer than necessary, then minimized it without opening anything. Whatever it was, it could wait. Mornings had their own rhythm, and breaking it for curiosity rarely paid off. I stood up, grabbed my notebook, and walked into the first meeting of the day. A small conference room. A whiteboard already half filled with logistics timelines and unit codes. No small talk. No catching up. Just work. This was the part of my life my family never quite understood. Not because it was secret, but because it didn't translate well into casual conversation. You couldn't explain responsibility here in terms of job titles or LinkedIn updates. You explained it in outcomes. Either something worked or it didn't. Either people had what they needed or they didn't. That clarity was what drew me in from the beginning. Basic training stripped away everything unnecessary. Excuses, performative confidence, the need to be liked. You learned fast that reacting emotionally only made things harder. The people who lasted weren't the loudest or the most impressive on day one. They were the ones who could absorb pressure and keep moving. Over time, that became second nature. I learned how to listen without interrupting, how to speak only when it mattered, how to notice details most people missed because they were too busy defending themselves. Those skills didn't look impressive from the outside. They didn't photograph well. But they saved time, money, and sometimes lives. Deployments reinforced that lesson. When things went wrong, there was no room for panic or ego. Supplies didn't arrive because someone felt confident. They arrived because someone double-checked a route, caught an error, and fixed it before it spread. Quiet competence wasn't optional. It was the baseline. I never talked about that side of things when I went home. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I'd learned that explaining myself didn't change the narrative. My family had already decided what my career represented. Anything I added sounded like justification. So I stopped adding. Years passed that way. Promotions came when they were earned. Responsibility increased. My role shifted from executing plans to fixing broken ones. When a system failed, I was often called in not to make speeches, but to figure out where reality had drifted away from the reports. That work taught me patience. Systems don't collapse overnight. Neither do reputations. Problems grow quietly in the gaps between what people say and what actually happens. The irony wasn't lost on me. At family gatherings, my sister's career updates grew more polished. She learned how to frame projects, how to position herself as central to every success. My parents repeated her talking points proudly, even when they didn't fully understand them. They liked that her life sounded impressive. Mine sounded inconvenient. Still moving around a lot, my mother would ask. Still in that same role, my father would add, as if consistency were a flaw. I answered briefly and changed the subject. There was no point correcting them. The military had already taught me something my family hadn't. Not every misunderstanding needs to be resolved. Some just need to be left behind. Back in the conference room, the meeting wrapped up efficiently. Action items assigned. Deadlines clear. I returned to my office and closed the door behind me. Only then did I open the email. It was from my sister's boss. No greeting beyond my name. No explanation beyond a request to talk. Polite, professional. The kind of message that suggested intention without urgency. I leaned back in my chair and read it again. It didn't ask about the party. It didn't reference my sister. It didn't acknowledge what had been said. Just a simple line about availability. For a moment I considered declining. Not out of fear and out of habit. My instinct was always to stay out of family-adjacent complications. But this wasn't that. This was work. Or at least it sounded like it. I replied with a short confirmation and suggested a time later in the week. Then I closed my laptop and sat there quietly letting the hum of the building settle around me. There was a version of me years ago who might have wondered if this was some kind of test, or a trap, or a chance to finally be seen. That version had learned better. You don't assume intent without evidence. You observe. You wait. The rest of the day moved forward without interruption. Calls, emails, a minor issue with a shipment that needed rerouting, the usual. Still something felt different. Not dramatic, just slightly off balance, like a piece on the board had shifted when no one was looking. That evening, I stopped by the gym on base and worked through a familiar routine. Repetition had always helped me think. By the time I showered and changed my mind had quieted again. Driving home, I passed the same stretch of road I'd taken the night of the party. Same lights, same intersections. The difference wasn't the setting. It was my awareness of it. My sister had always believed the story she told about me. That was clear now. She didn't see herself as cruel. In her mind, she was just stating the obvious, saying out loud what everyone already thought. What she didn't understand was how little that label mattered outside the bubble she lived in. At home, I checked my phone once more. No new messages, no follow-ups, just the original email sitting calmly in my inbox waiting. I placed the phone face down on the counter and started dinner. Simple, efficient. The kind of meal you make when you don't need distractions. As I moved through the familiar motions, I thought about how strange it was that the same traits my family dismissed had kept me steady for years. How the ability to stay quiet, to observe, to let things reveal themselves over time, had been shaped by a choice they never supported. I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. I felt prepared, and that was enough to keep me moving through the evening without breaking stride. I walked into my office the next morning and set my bag down before I even glanced at the clock. Habit more than discipline. I liked arriving before the day could get ahead of me. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant people were working instead of talking about work. I pulled the email back up on my screen and read it carefully this time. Same tone, same restraint. No hidden urgency, just a request to meet in person if my schedule allowed. We settled on a late afternoon time at my office. Neutral ground. That alone told me something. If this were casual curiosity, a call would have done. If it were authority flexing, he would have named his location. This was neither. The rest of the day passed normally. Briefings, reviews, a minor adjustment to a transport plan that saved time and money without drawing attention. The kind of fix that rarely earned credit, but always mattered. At exactly 4 o'clock, my assistant knocked once and said someone was here to see me. No name. No explanation. Just a tone that suggested the visitor carried himself with confidence and didn't need an introduction. I stepped into the reception area and recognized him immediately. Same posture. Same measured expression. He wore a civilian suit, but nothing about him felt corporate. He extended his hand. "Rachel Donovan," he said, not a question. We shook hands. His grip was firm, practiced. Military or close enough to it. "Thank you for meeting with me," he added. "I won't take much of your time." I gestured toward the conference room. Simple space. Clean table. No distractions. He took a seat across from me and placed a thin folder in front of him unopened. For a moment he didn't speak. He looked around the room, not in judgment but in recognition, as if the layout told him something he already expected. "I didn't connect it at the event," he said finally. "Not right away." I didn't respond. Silence tends to do more work than explanations. He continued, "Your last name caught my attention. Your reaction sealed it." That got a look from me, brief but direct. "You didn't react," he said. "Most people would have, especially in that setting." "I've had practice," I replied. He nodded once. "So have I." He opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. It was old, faded at the edges. A report formatted in a style I hadn't used in years but recognized instantly. Concise, bullet points, no wasted language. "I was a major at this time," he said, "overseeing a joint logistics operation that was bleeding resources and time." On paper, everything looked fine. In reality, nothing was lining up. The memory surfaced slowly. Long nights, inconsistent data, a system held together by assumptions and hope. "You were assigned to support," he continued. "Junior officer. No authority. No expectation you'd do more than compile information." I glanced at the report. My name was on the second page, not the first. That hadn't bothered me then. It didn't bother me now. "You didn't just compile," he said. "You questioned. You cross-checked. You noticed a pattern no one else wanted to acknowledge." I remembered the moment clearly. A discrepancy that kept repeating itself across different units. Too consistent to be random. Too inconvenient to be popular. I remember pushing back, he said. Being told it was just noise. "You didn't argue. You documented." "That was the job," I said. "That was discipline," he corrected. "And it saved the operation." He closed the folder gently. "I've kept this longer than I keep most things. I let that sit between us. Recognition doesn't always feel like validation. Sometimes it just feels like confirmation." At the event, he went on. "When your sister introduced you the way she did, I didn't see a failure. I saw someone who knew exactly how to hold her ground." I thought of my sister's smirk. The confidence she drew from having an audience that already agreed with her. "She believes her version of things I said." "So do most people," he replied. "Until they don't." He shifted slightly in his chair. "I didn't come here because of family matters. I came because of work." That was the line that mattered. "Our company initiated an internal review months ago," he said. "Routine at first, then less so. We're integrating new acquisitions, tightening compliance, correcting gaps, before they become liabilities." I listened without interrupting. This wasn't gossip. This was context. "We need someone external," he continued. "Someone with experience in systems that don't tolerate shortcuts. Someone who understands accountability without making it personal." I leaned back, considering. "And you thought of me." "I remembered you," he said. "There's a difference." He slid a second document across the table. A proposal. Scope defined. Duration limited. Compensation appropriate but not excessive. Clean terms. No hidden hooks. "I want you to review our processes," he said. "Independently. No internal politics, no favors." I glanced at the pages without committing to anything. "Does this involve my sister?" His expression didn't change. "Not directly. This review started long before that event." That answer was careful, deliberate. It told me what he could say and what he chose not to. "I won't be involved in personnel decisions," I said. "I don't cross that line." "I wouldn't ask you to," he replied. "I don't need opinions. I need clarity." We sat there for a moment, the hum of the building filling the space between us. This wasn't an ambush. It wasn't an emotional play. It was an offer built on memory and method. "I'll need time to review this," I said. "Of course," he replied, standing. "Take what you need." We shook hands again. As he turned to leave, he paused briefly. "For what it's worth," he said, "people who call others failures usually measure success in very narrow terms." Then he was gone. I returned to my desk and sat quietly, the proposal still unopened beside me. Outside my office, the workday continued at its usual pace. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Nothing had shifted visibly, but something had moved, all the same, subtle and precise, like a gear finally engaging after years of free spin. I didn't sign the proposal right away. That wasn't hesitation. That was habit. Anything involving outside systems deserved the same scrutiny I gave my own work. I read it line by line that evening at my kitchen table, cross-checking scope, authority, and boundaries. No vague language, no open-ended obligations, no expectation that I'd play referee in office politics. By the time I finished, it was clear why he'd come to me instead of hiring a large consulting firm with a polished deck and a marketing budget. This wasn't about appearances. It was about finding out where things stopped lining up. I agreed to a preliminary engagement and submitted the required disclosures through my chain of command. Clean. Above board. No shortcuts. Within a week, I had access to a limited data set and a clear mandate: assess processes, identify risk exposure, document inconsistencies. Nothing more. I started the way I always did. Quietly. The company's operations looked solid at a glance. Well-funded. Efficient on paper. But systems don't tell the truth when you only look at summaries. They tell the truth in the margins, in the exceptions, in the small decisions no one thinks to question because they don't seem worth the effort. Patterns emerged quickly. Expense reports that stayed just under thresholds, requiring secondary approval. Project credits that flowed upward with unusual consistency. Timelines adjusted after the fact to make outcomes look cleaner than they'd been in real time. None of it screamed fraud on its own. Together it suggested something else. A culture where bending the rules had become routine because it worked. I flagged discrepancies and requested supporting documentation. Responses came back promptly, professionally. Too professionally. The language was polished, defensive without being aggressive. The kind of tone people use when they're confident nothing will come of it. One name appeared repeatedly in the files. Not everywhere, just often enough to be noticeable. My sister. I didn't react. Reaction clouds. Judgment. I noted it, logged it, and moved on. If this review was going to mean anything, it had to stand without my personal history coloring the outcome. As the days went on, the picture sharpened. A major contract had been attributed to my sister as lead. The presentation had her name on it. The bonus tied to it had been paid to her. But the underlying analysis came from someone else entirely. A junior analyst whose work had been folded into updates my sister forwarded as her own. Emails told the story plainly. Requests for quick tweaks. Instructions to route all communication through her. Reframing ideas just enough to sound original. It was effective. It was also traceable. The expense side was less subtle. Travel labeled as client development that coincided neatly with personal trips. Clothing purchases categorized as professional requirements. Even preliminary costs related to the event I'd attended had been quietly passed through as exploratory business expenses. I documented everything. Dates, amounts, cross-references. This wasn't about catching someone out. It was about accuracy. Accuracy doesn't care who gets uncomfortable. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that this behavior hadn't started recently. It had grown over time, fed by small successes and a lack of consequences. Each step made the next one easier. I kept my work compartmentalized. No discussions at home. No comments to family. No visible change in how I interacted with anyone. That distance wasn't coldness. It was discipline. The call from my sister came late one evening while I was reviewing a set of reconciliations. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was tight, controlled. The way people sound when they've rehearsed what they're about to say but aren't sure how it will land. "We need to talk," she said. I told her I was busy. She insisted. I agreed to meet briefly at a cafe near her office the next morning. Public, neutral, efficient. She arrived early and ordered nothing. That alone told me she was rattled. She didn't waste time on small talk. I know you're consulting for the company, she said. I didn't realize it at first, but people talk. I didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't need validation. They're asking questions, she continued, about processes, about how decisions were made. That's usually how reviews work, I said. She leaned forward. You've seen my name. It wasn't a question. I'm not here to discuss specifics, I replied. That wouldn't be appropriate. Her composure slipped for just a second. Enough to show the strain underneath. Rachel, she said, using my name like a lever. You know how this looks. They don't understand the context, the pressure, the expectations. I understand systems, I said, not excuses. Her jaw tightened. I need you to confirm something. I waited. That we talked through some of those decisions, she said. That I didn't act alone. Just general guidance. Nothing detailed. No, I said. The word landed flat between us. She stared at me, disbelief turning quickly into frustration. You're really going to do this? I'm not doing anything, I replied. I'm not lying. She dropped her voice. This affects more than just me. Mom and Dad. The family. Do you want this kind of attention on us? There it was. The familiar pressure point. Family as leverage. I won't compromise my work, I said. Or my record. Her expression hardened. You always do this, she snapped. You act like you're better than everyone else. I didn't respond. Arguments like that don't lead anywhere useful. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Think about what you're risking, she said, then walked out without looking back. I returned to my office and continued where I'd left off. The data hadn't changed. The documentation still told the same story. My responsibility hadn't shifted just because someone was uncomfortable with the truth. Later that afternoon, I received an automated system alert indicating new files had been added to a shared directory. Routine. I opened them and scanned the metadata. Something was off. The timestamps were clustered, the formatting inconsistent. The sender address was close to mine, but not quite right. One character off in the domain. Easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Impossible to ignore if you were. The content was worse. Detailed suggestions on reallocating expenses. Advice on managing credit attribution. Written as if from me. Written to imply ongoing consultation. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was escalation. I didn't delete anything. I didn't forward it immediately. I preserved the files, captured the metadata, and documented the access logs. Procedure mattered now more than ever. Some lines once crossed don't allow for misunderstandings. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was busy running through procedures. Once documentation crosses into fabrication, the response isn't emotional. It's technical. You slow down. You verify. You protect your lane. I arrived early again, logged into the system, and pulled the files into a secure workspace. I checked access times, IP ranges, and user permissions. The pattern was clumsy in a way that suggested urgency rather than planning. Whoever had done this wanted speed, not perfection. By mid-morning, my phone vibrated on the desk. My sister's name lit up the screen. I let it ring out. A minute later, a text followed. Then another. Short messages at first, neutral, then sharper. We need to talk. You didn't have to take it this far. This can still be fixed. I didn't respond. I forwarded the metadata to compliance, attached my notes, and kept working. That was the cleanest option available. Anything else would invite interpretation. Around lunchtime, she showed up unannounced. The receptionist buzzed my office to let me know she was here. I told her to send my sister in. No drama. No scene in the hallway. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen with witnesses nearby and doors open. She walked in looking composed, but the effort showed. Her shoulders were tight. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You didn't answer my call, she said. I was working, I replied. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it. They think you're involved. I didn't react. Who is they? Compliance. Legal. Whoever you sent those notes to. She crossed her arms. You know how these things work. Once they get a narrative, they don't let go. I looked at her steadily. There shouldn't be a narrative if there's nothing to hide. Her laugh came out sharp. Don't do that. Don't pretend this is clean and simple. It is, I said. That's the problem. She stepped closer. You're the only person who can slow this down. I'm not, I replied. And I wouldn't even if I were. Her jaw tightened. All I need is confirmation. One sentence. That we talked. That you gave informal guidance. They'll close the loop and move on. No, I said again. She stared at me. The disbelief from before replaced by something darker. You always act like rules are sacred, she snapped. Out here, people adapt. Out here, I said calmly, people document. She shook her head. You don't get it. This isn't about a few receipts. This affects my career. You made choices, I replied. I didn't. Her voice dropped. And what about Mom and Dad? There it was again. The lever she'd been trained to pull. They're already worried, she continued. Do you want investigators calling them neighbors asking questions? Do you want that kind of mess attached to the family name? I leaned back in my chair. You attached this to the family when you tried to drag me into it. Her eyes flashed. You think you're untouchable because you wear a uniform? I think my record matters, I said. And I'm not putting it at risk to protect yours. She laughed bitterly. You've never cared about family optics. I've cared about consequences, I said. There's a difference. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. Not by my refusal, but by how final it sounded. She took a step back, straightened her jacket, and smoothed her hair. The shift was quick, controlled, a return to presentation. Then I hope you're ready, she said. Because if this goes sideways, don't expect me to shield you. I'm not asking you to, I replied. She opened the door and paused. You think you're doing the right thing, she said. We'll see. After she left, I sat still for a few seconds, letting the air settle. Encounters like that can leave residue if you let them. I didn't. I stepped into the hallway and asked my assistant to note the visit in the log. Dates and times matter. That afternoon I received a call from my parents. My mother spoke first. Her voice was strained, careful. Your sister says there's a misunderstanding at work. I'm aware, I said. She's under a lot of pressure, my father added. You know how these companies can be. I know how accountability works, I replied. There was a pause. We just don't want things getting out of hand, my mother said. This could affect everyone. I didn't create the situation, I said. And I won't lie to fix it. My father sighed. You've always been so rigid. I let that sit. That rigidity has kept me employed, I said. And credible. Another pause. No rebuttal this time. After the call, I updated my notes and continued working through the audit. More inconsistencies surfaced. More attempts to retroactively clean records. Each one added weight to the file. Late in the day, a new email appeared in the shared system. Another attempt to establish false continuity. This one referenced conversations that never happened, written with just enough detail to sound plausible. I saved it, logged it, and forwarded it through the proper channel. There's a point in any conflict where intentions stop mattering. Actions become the only thing that counts. My sister had crossed that point. Not because she'd made mistakes, but because she'd tried to offload them. I shut down my computer and left the office as the sun dipped low behind the buildings. The parking lot was quiet, orderly. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, not to dwell but to recalibrate. Pressure doesn't come all at once. It builds in layers. Calls, messages, warnings, disguised as concern. I'd been trained to recognize that pattern too. And I knew exactly what came next if someone decided the truth was too dangerous to face. The first thing I did the next morning was check my clearance portal. Not because I expected to see anything, but because you don't wait for problems to announce themselves. You look for early signs, notifications, flags, anything out of place. Everything was clean. That didn't relax me. It just told me the timing mattered. At work, the atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. Conversations paused when I walked past. Not out of suspicion, but awareness. People knew an investigation was underway. They didn't know the details, only that documentation was being pulled and questions were getting more specific. I focused on my lane. I always did. That meant staying precise and predictable. Deviating from routine gives people room to speculate. Around mid-morning, compliance requested a formal statement from me. Standard procedure. They didn't frame it as urgent or alarming. Just a request for clarification regarding communications attributed to my account. I printed everything, not just the fake emails, but the logs, the metadata, the access records showing which workstation had been used, the domain registration details. Each piece by itself was forgettable. Together they formed a timeline that didn't require interpretation. As I worked, I thought about how quickly things had escalated. Asking me to lie had been a gamble. Trying to fabricate evidence was a decision. One that assumed I wouldn't notice, wouldn't push back, or wouldn't be believed. That assumption told me more than anything else. By early afternoon, the calls started. Blocked numbers. Voicemails left without messages. One call where no one spoke on the other end. I didn't answer any of them. I documented the attempts and forwarded the information to legal. That wasn't paranoia. That was pattern recognition. Later that day, my sister sent an email to a shared distribution list. Carefully worded. Calm. Professional. It referenced ongoing collaboration and prior consultations with me, positioning my role as advisory without stating anything outright. It was subtle, too subtle. The email didn't accuse me of anything. It didn't ask for confirmation. It simply placed my name in proximity to decisions under scrutiny, planting a seed that could grow if left alone. I forwarded it with a note for context. No such collaboration occurred. That was all. The response came faster than I expected. Compliance acknowledged receipt and asked me to stand by. No reassurance, no commentary, just process. That evening I drove home with the radio off, letting the quiet help me think. Framing someone only works if they panic or over-explain. I wasn't going to do either. At home, I reviewed my notes one more time. Clean. Factual. Chronological. If someone unfamiliar with the situation read through them, they'd come to the same conclusion I had. That was the standard I worked toward. I was halfway through making dinner when my sister showed up again. This time she didn't call ahead. I opened the door and found her standing there, jaw set, eyes sharp. She didn't try to come in. She didn't need to. They're questioning everything now, she said, including you. That's what happens when evidence doesn't line up, I replied. Her laugh was short and humorless. Don't pretend you're surprised. I'm not, I said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If they think you were advising me, even informally, it spreads the responsibility. That helps everyone. It helps you, I corrected. She stared at me. You're really going to let them tear this apart? I'm letting the facts stand, I said. You should try it. Her face hardened. I didn't think you'd go this far. I didn't think you would either, I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she straightened again, the switch flipping back to composure. Be careful, she said. You're not as insulated as you think. I know exactly what I'm accountable for, I said. That's why I'm not worried. She turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door and locked it more out of habit than fear. Some conflicts stop being emotional long before they stop being dangerous. The next morning, an official notice appeared in my inbox. I was requested to provide testimony in a formal internal hearing. Observer status for now. Relevant party due to attempted attribution. That was new. I prepared the way I always did. Notes organized, files labeled. Nothing extraneous, nothing personal. At the office, security procedures were tighter than usual. Badges scanned, names checked. The company wasn't playing this down. That alone told me my documentation had landed where it was supposed to. I took a seat in a small observation room adjacent to the main conference area. One-way glass, audio feed, neutral space. Through the glass, I saw my sister enter the room. She looked composed, confident even. A folder under her arm, notes in hand. She took her seat across from compliance, legal, and senior leadership. She believed presentation could still save her. The hearing began without ceremony. Dates, Figures, receipts, emails, each piece projected on the screen in sequence. No commentary, no accusations, just facts. When the fabricated emails appeared, my sister leaned forward. She spoke calmly at first, explained pressures, tight deadlines, misunderstandings, claimed informal guidance, referred vaguely to conversations that never happened. Then the technical details came up: IP addresses, access logs, domain registrations. The room changed. Her explanations slowed. Her confidence thinned. She asked for clarifications that only highlighted gaps in her story. From the observation room, I watched the shift happen in real time. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the quiet collapse of a narrative that could no longer support itself. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. The kind you get when you're watching something inevitable unfold without needing to intervene. As the hearing continued, one thing became clear. This was no longer about who was believed. It was about what could be proven, and the record once established doesn't negotiate. I listened through the audio feed as the panel worked its way methodically through the evidence. No raised voices, no dramatic pauses, just a steady sequence of questions followed by answers that grew shorter each time they were challenged by documentation on the screen. My sister tried to stay ahead of it. She adjusted her tone, shifted her posture, softened her language. When that didn't work, she leaned on context, stress, expectations, competitive environments, the idea that everyone cuts corners and that she was being singled out for doing what others did more discreetly. The panel didn't argue with her. They didn't need to. They asked for clarification on one expense report, then another. They compared timelines. They displayed side-by-side versions of project drafts showing how original analysis had been altered just enough to obscure its source. Each time my sister attempted an explanation, each time the answer raised a new question. At one point she mentioned my name again. Not directly accusing, just positioning. A suggestion that decisions had been informed by conversations with someone who understood both military and corporate frameworks. That was when compliance intervened. They pulled up the access logs and displayed the email header information. The room went quiet in a different way than before. This silence wasn't anticipation. It was recognition. The domain discrepancy was subtle but undeniable. The timestamps clustered tightly around the evening after our meeting at the cafe. The originating workstation matched hers exactly. There was no ambiguity left to hide behind. Her shoulders stiffened. She stopped gesturing. Her answers became clipped, then defensive. When asked directly whether she had created or authorized those communications, she hesitated long enough for the hesitation to matter. "I don't recall," she said finally. That was the wrong answer. The legal counsel leaned forward slightly. "You don't need to recall," he said evenly. "We have the records." The hearing moved faster after that. Decisions tend to do that once the key fact lands. The remaining questions weren't about guilt. They were about scope, duration, impact. From my seat behind the glass, I watched my sister's confidence drain in small increments. Not all at once, in stages. Each revelation stripped away another layer of control she'd relied on. I thought about the night of the event, the smirk, the certainty in her voice when she labeled me a failure. She had believed she understood how power worked. She had mistaken visibility for leverage. The panel excused her briefly while they deliberated. She gathered her papers with deliberate care as if order might restore balance. When she left the room, her gaze flicked toward the observation window, though there was no sign she knew I was there. The deliberation didn't take long. When the panel reconvened, the decision was delivered without flourish. Immediate termination for gross misconduct, formal recovery of misappropriated funds, referral to external authorities for further review based on the scale and intent demonstrated. My sister sat very still as it was read aloud. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She nodded once as if acknowledging a technical outcome she hadn't anticipated but couldn't dispute. Security was called not dramatically but as procedure. She was escorted to collect personal items and exit through a side corridor. Not the front entrance. Not the one she'd used to project success for years. I left the building shortly after declining the offer to speak further. There was nothing to add. My documentation stood on its own. Outside, the afternoon air felt sharper than usual. Not colder, clearer. I sat in my car for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, not starting the engine right away. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved in the way people imagine. Mostly, I felt steady. The kind of steadiness that comes when a long-standing imbalance finally corrects itself. The phone buzzed before I pulled out of the parking lot. A message from my mother. Short, careful, asking if I'd heard anything. I didn't respond immediately. I drove home first. That evening, I received formal confirmation from compliance thanking me for my cooperation and professionalism. The language was precise, appreciative without being personal. Exactly how I preferred it. Another message followed, this one from my sister. No accusations, no explanations. Just a single line asking why I hadn't helped her when I could have. I read it once and set the phone down. Helping her would have meant erasing the line she'd already crossed. It would have meant absorbing risk that wasn't mine to carry. It would have meant reinforcing the idea that consequences were optional if you argued hard enough. I cooked dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and reviewed a briefing packet for the next day. Life didn't pause for corporate fallout. Later, as I prepared for bed, I thought about how quiet everything felt. No calls, no demands, no need to explain myself to anyone. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned. By the time I turned off the light, my mind had already shifted back to work. There were systems still running, responsibilities still in place. The world hadn't tilted because one person's story collapsed. It had simply adjusted the way it always does when facts finally outweigh performance. The invitation arrived in the mail instead of as a text, which already told me more than the words on the envelope. Handwritten address. Careful spacing. My aunt's handwriting hadn't changed in decades. She was the only one in the family who still wrote letters when something mattered. Dinner. Everyone. One night. No agenda listed. I almost declined. Not out of anger, but because distance had become easier than explanation. Still, I knew who she was. If she was asking this way, it wasn't for small talk. Her house sat in the same quiet neighborhood it always had. The kind where nothing looked urgent even when it was. Cars lined the driveway when I arrived. My parents' sedan. My sisters parked a little crooked this time. A couple of cousins I hadn't seen in years. Inside, the table was already set. Candles lit. Food laid out carefully, like order could be restored through routine. My aunt hugged me tightly, her grip firmer than her frame suggested. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Sit where you like." No one rushed to greet me. My parents nodded politely. My sister didn't look up from her plate. Dinner started the way these things usually do. Neutral topics. Weather. Work schedules. Someone commented on traffic. No one said my sister's name. No one said mine either. The silence wasn't awkward yet, just cautious. Halfway through the meal, my aunt set her fork down and stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't clear her throat dramatically. She simply waited until everyone noticed she was standing. "I asked you all here because I'm tired of pretending," she said. "And because this family has been lying to itself for a long time." My father shifted in his chair. "This isn't necessary," he said. She raised a hand. "It is." She looked around the table, then directly at me. "Rachel has been treated like a problem since she was old enough to be compared." My mother inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," my aunt replied. "And accuracy matters." No one interrupted her this time. When I was diagnosed, she continued, "The insurance gaps nearly wiped me out. I was prepared to sell this house." She paused. Rachel covered the remainder. Quietly. Through the hospital foundation. I didn't know until a thank you letter arrived with her name on it. My mother froze, fork hovering midair. My aunt turned to my cousin Mark. "When you lost your job and needed capital to start over, who loaned you the money you needed without interest or conditions?" Mark looked down. "Rachel." She nodded. "And Lisa, when your lease fell through and you had nowhere to go?" Lisa's husband cleared his throat. Rachel covered the rent. The room grew still. Not stunned. Just forced to acknowledge something it had been skirting for years. And the education fund, my aunt said, her voice tightening slightly. The one your father set up for each grandchild. She turned to my parents. Rachel's share was redirected. Entirely. To pay for Stephanie's tuition and first apartment. My father straightened. That was a practical decision. It was theft, my aunt said flatly, disguised as favoritism. My sister looked up then. I didn't ask for that. You accepted it, my aunt replied. And you've accepted a lot since. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. I've watched this family reward presentation over substance, my aunt continued. Charm over character. And every time Rachel chose discipline over drama, you took it as proof she didn't need support. No one contradicted her. Even now, I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. None of this was new to me. Hearing it out loud didn't hurt the way people expect. It clarified. My sister finally spoke. This isn't all on me. No, my aunt said. It isn't. That's the point. She looked at my parents. You taught her that outcomes mattered more than methods. You taught Rachel that silence was safer than honesty. Now you're surprised by where that led. My father opened his mouth and closed it again. My aunt sat back down. The room stayed quiet. Not heavy, just exposed. Dessert was served without comment. People ate slowly. No one reached for seconds. Conversations didn't restart. They drifted, then stopped again. When chairs finally scraped back and people began to leave, goodbyes were brief, polite, controlled. My sister left without speaking to me. My parents hesitated, then followed her. Outside, my aunt walked me to my car. I didn't do that to embarrass anyone, she said. I did it because pretending was destroying things quietly. I know, I replied. She squeezed my hand. You don't owe them reconciliation. I'm not looking for it, I said. Driving home, I noticed how light my chest felt. Not relieved. Unburdened. The difference mattered. I didn't replay the dinner in my head. I didn't analyze reactions. I didn't wait for messages. For the first time, there was nothing left to explain. The next morning, my phone buzzed once. A missed call from my mother. No voicemail. I silenced it and went about my day, the routine steady and familiar. Some truths don't repair relationships. They just end the confusion about why they never worked to begin with. I changed my phone number on a Tuesday afternoon between meetings. Not out of anger. Not after a long night of thinking. Just because I was already on the carrier's website updating an unrelated setting and the option was there. It felt practical. I updated my contacts list afterward. Work first. Command staff. Teammates. A few friends who knew where to find me without asking questions. I didn't send announcements. I didn't explain. People who needed the number had it. The rest sorted itself out quietly. Emails from unfamiliar addresses began to arrive over the next few weeks. Some cautious. Some emotional. Most vague. I set filters and let them disappear into folders I never opened. Silence, I'd learned, didn't require justification. Work continued. It always did. The consulting engagement wrapped up ahead of schedule. Systems tightened. Redundancies removed. The final report didn't mention names. It didn't need to. Processes don't care who built them wrong. They only care that someone fixes them. Her former boss reached out once more. Briefly. To thank me. To let me know the board had approved an extension if I was interested. Advisory only. Strategic oversight. No politics. I accepted. That role didn't change my day-to-day life dramatically. It just expanded the scale of the problems I worked on. Fewer fires, bigger systems, more distance from noise. At the same time, my military responsibilities shifted. A new assignment came through, one that required more coordination and less visibility. Exactly my preference. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't post about it. I updated my calendar and moved on. Occasionally information filtered back through mutual acquaintances. Not details. Just outlines. My sister had separated quietly from the life she'd built. The legal recovery drained her savings faster than she'd expected. Jobs were harder to come by when background checks raised questions no amount of charm could smooth over. My parents stayed where they were. Same house. Same routines. Fewer gatherings. More time passing without markers. Regret, I heard, had become a common theme in conversations they didn't know reached me. I didn't respond. That wasn't punishment. It was alignment. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. They decide what reaches you and what doesn't. For most of my life, I'd let guilt override them. Let obligations substitute for respect. That habit had cost me more energy than I realized. Without it, days felt lighter. Evenings were quieter. Not lonely. Quiet in a way that let thoughts settle instead of circling. I cooked. I exercised. I read without distraction. I slept well. Once, while driving home from base, I passed the exit that led toward my parents' neighborhood. The thought crossed my mind briefly, then moved on. There was nothing unresolved pulling me that direction anymore. What surprised me most wasn't the absence of conflict. It was how little space it left behind. The room that opened up wasn't empty. It was functional. At work, I was trusted. Not because of personality or proximity, but because results followed my involvement. People didn't ask me to perform. They asked me to assess, to correct, to decide what mattered and what didn't. That clarity had always been there. I'd just been applying it everywhere except my own life. One evening, I sat on my balcony watching the lights come on across the city. Not reflecting, not processing, just observing. I realized I hadn't thought about the label my sister used in weeks: failure. It had lost its shape, its edges. Words only hold power when you keep feeding them attention. I'd stopped doing that. Walking away hadn't required a speech or a confrontation. It had required consistency. Choosing not to engage, not to explain, not to re-enter cycles that ran on denial and entitlement. Some people call that cold. I call it accurate. The military taught me how to identify objectives, allocate resources, and disengage when a position no longer served its purpose. Applying that thinking to family felt strange at first. Then it felt obvious. I hadn't failed my family. I'd simply stopped compensating for their expectations. Life didn't transform overnight. There was no dramatic pivot, no applause, just steady progress in a direction I'd been moving toward all along. The difference was that I wasn't carrying anyone else's narrative anymore. I turned off the lights and went inside, already thinking about the next day's schedule. Meetings, reviews, decisions that mattered because they were grounded in reality. And that turned out to be enough. Looking back, the hardest lesson wasn't learning how to stand my ground. It was accepting that some people only respect strength once it's no longer available to them. Family drama has a way of blurring responsibility, especially when favoritism gets dressed up as love. This wasn't a loud revenge story. It was a quiet one. A family revenge story built on truth, discipline, and boundaries that held. I didn't win by proving anyone wrong. I won by stopping the need to prove anything at all. If stories like this resonate with you, real revenge stories, rooted in family conflict, accountability, and earned justice, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. These are the kinds of family revenge stories that don't rely on fantasies or shortcuts, just real choices and real consequences. Stay with us. There are many more stories like this coming.